Initially, it was a genuinely durable and straightforward product. Later on, gradually, they evolved into products with many features, abundant and with an extremely high price-performance ratio. And then after that, the attributes of some products started to become excessive, complex, and less durable. Even the same product was divided into multiple tiers, and the features also started to become redundant. When faced with these artificial demands that were deliberately created, people often feel an indescribable sense of conflict. That is, when shopping, they will think, "What is this for anyway? I don't even need it at all." Why, on the contrary, does it become a reason to buy it? Isn't this putting the cart before the horse? But when all your friends have bought this item, you ask them, "Do you actually use this feature? Is it really useful?" They reply, "I might not use it much, or even not use this feature at all, but you just have to have it." In that ironic and perplexing comparison, you start to constantly reminisce about that item from the old days. Simple and durable, it had been with you for many years, without too many bells and whistles. But when you look for it now, it's either been discontinued, or it has also lost its essence, just like those other flashy items. This, I believe, is a sentiment shared by many. But in reality, that's not an entirely objective viewpoint, because not all products are like that, and not all features and attributes are redundant and complex. It depends on the individual, leading to different perceptions. What one group of people considers useless might be a must-have for another. But this very theory of irrational consumption, which seems to be a matter of personal opinion, where everyone has a valid point, is itself a product, an inevitable one in the cycle of capitalism. It clearly reflects the internal contradictions of capitalism. That is, capital not only wants to recover the value of the invested capital, but also must extract surplus value from every single product. When simple, durable products can no longer satisfy the speed of capital circulation, breaking down the use value into functional modules, or what we often call feature dripping, becomes one of the methods to stimulate consumer demand. This is just like how, when a complete product can be used for 20 years, capital loses the profit space of the other 19 years. So capital begins to implement so-called technical modifications for the product. By stacking functions, creating tiers, and shortening lifespans, they deliberately create a demand for upgrades, causing the pressure for value appreciation, which belongs to the production stage, P, to be shifted to the circulation stage, W, and the so-called artificial demand that we see, in essence, is an invisible accelerator created to shorten the circulation time from W to G. And when a product is endowed with non-practical values, like social attributes, status symbols, or speculative attributes, the core of the purchase naturally shifts away from its use value and moves towards the pursuit of exchange value. This mechanism ultimately leads to two outcomes we are all familiar with. Manufacturers must continuously create new selling points to maintain their profit margins, thus falling into an endless vortex of internal competition. Meanwhile, the buyers, amidst these artificially constructed values, simultaneously criticize and resent the redundancy of features, yet find it hard to escape the urge to consume. After all, we don't actually hate this complexity and redundancy. Any commercial activity needs room for profit. There's nothing wrong with that. What people want is a bit of well-deserved respect, and not these relentless, perverse upgrades without limit, and certainly not, for the sake of profit, ganging up to smear, push out, and suppress products that truly have the mass consumer in mind. When people ask, what is it actually for? They are actually asking about the disconnect between use value and exchange value within the circuit of capital. And when you just have to have it becomes the reason for purchase, then for us, the use value of that item is no longer the primary need. Instead, using it to express a certain social status becomes the core purpose. This is exactly what we've continuously discussed in previous episodes. Commodity fetishism. Instead of saying commodities dominate people, it's more accurate to say that people themselves create a certain concept and then project that concept onto the commodity. This causes people to unconsciously and voluntarily endlessly pursue desire itself, not the commodity. This is the third episode in our series on Das Kapital, Volume 2. In the last two episodes, we have come to understand the circuit of money capital and the circuit of productive capital. Now, in this episode, building on the previous two, we are going to perform a small synthesis. This synthesis gives it a special characteristic. To put it in simple terms, it is both an inlet valve and also an outlet drain. But if it gets clogged, then all the other circuits will also grind to a halt. Therefore, the starting point of the circuit of commodity capital is C-plane. This C-plane is not only the result of the circuits of money, capital M, and productive capital, P, but it is also a crucial precondition for those very circuits. Therefore, its formula is as follows: C, M, C, P, C. When one capitalist completes the act of buying, MC, it corresponds to another capitalist entering the transformation phase, CM. This might sound a bit abstract to you. Let's use an example here. Is greater than the initial C plans, indicating an increased amount of value. This allows us to see the result of the capitalization of surplus value more visually. Therefore, the general formula is to distinguish the function and form of capital, while the double prime is to distinguish the quantitative level. It is like an auxiliary tool introduced to analyze the dynamics of the scale of reproduction, and it doesn't affect the structural form of the circuit. Because in the general formula, the function of commodity capital is the same. This is similar to the last episode, where we first used simple reproduction as a basis to construct a fundamental model of circulation. Then, on that basis, we introduced the condition of expanded reproduction so that the process of capital accumulation could be seen visually and dynamically rather than as a relatively static circuit. This is also why, since the very first episode, I have continuously stressed the concept of dynamic development, because analyzing the composition of capital in this manner allows one to move from the abstract to the concrete. So you can understand the general formula as a fundamental law of the capitalist mode of production, that is, the necessity of valorization and capital circulation. As for C, it corresponds to the historical tendency of capital in the process of accumulation, meaning the scale is constantly expanding and its contradictions are constantly deepening. This is also why many of you, when reading Volume 1 of Das Kapital, find it relatively easy to understand, but when it comes to Volume 2, when the author starts to deeply analyze the functions of the various forms of capital, you suddenly feel it's very strange, vague, like you're lost in a fog, and you give up reading, because Volume 2 has a certain philosophical barrier to entry. For example, that simple double prime we just mentioned is only briefly mentioned in the original text. But to understand this brief mention, you need to grasp a few core points in Marxist philosophy to be able to understand it. That is the unity of form and content, the abstract and the concrete, and logic and history. At the same time, it is also the core component of historical materialist dialectics. Once separated from these principles, it becomes no different from objective idealist dialectics. Let me elaborate a bit for you here. Note that I said objective idealism. Idealism is also divided into subjective and objective idealism. I'll try to use familiar examples to make it easier to understand. For instance, Wang Yangming's "Without the mind, there is no object. Without the mind, there is no principle. No object outside the mind, no principle outside the mind." These belong to subjective idealism. As for Laozi's "The Tao begot one, one begot two, two begot three, and three begot all things," or Hegel's "What is rational is real." These belong to objective idealism. I won't list examples for materialism, as you've all learned it in your mandatory civics classes. Through these clear comparisons, I hope everyone has a clearer understanding. You can see that their difference is that subjective idealism takes the self as its starting point, taking the subjective human spirit as the starting point. It has the highest priority. Everything else exists within my spiritual world. Objective idealism, however, posits that outside of the self, there is an objective and independent spirit that exists, like the Tao of Laozi, or the absolute spirit of Hegel. It has the highest priority. All laws exist within its world. Of course, if we were to subdivide further, there are many more, such as Kant's transcendental idealism, which revolves around the thing in itself and the phenomenal world, and so on. We'll discuss these in more detail later. This was just a brief digression for everyone. Okay, let's return to the main topic. Now, let's take the three forms of the circuit of capital and look at them one by one. First is the circuit of money capital. Its formula is MCPCM. You'll notice it takes the form of money capital as its starting point and end point. In this circuit, the circulation phase is interrupted by the production process into two separate stages. M in one circuit in the circuit is transformed into a new M fric in the next. Surplus value is established as a potential for accumulation. Money is merely the advanced form of capital. Its ultimate purpose is to realize exchange value, not use value. Next is the circuit of productive capital. Its formula is PCMCP. It views production as an integrated process and sees circulation as a mediator for reproduction, thereby connecting preceding and succeeding production cycles. P in the next cycle again becomes P. Therefore, its core is the continuity of the production process, which must not be interrupted. Once production is interrupted, valorization will cease. This is why reserve funds appear at this stage. As for the circuit of commodity capital in this episode of ours, its formula is CMCPC. It begins by taking valorized commodity capital as its starting point. In simple terms, its very starting point already includes surplus value, regardless of whether it is simple or expanded reproduction. C always begins the circuit as commodity capital, that is, capital value plus surplus value. Its core lies in its interconnectedness. In simple terms, whether it's simple or expanded reproduction, valorization is always apparent. Furthermore, the C of one individual capitalist must correspond to the MC phase of other capitalists. Each circuit begins with a more advanced form of C plan. Perhaps this still feels a bit abstract to you. Of the circuit of capital, and look at them one by one. First is the circuit of money capital. Its formula is MCPCM. You'll notice it takes the form of money capital as its starting point and end point. In this circuit, the circulation phase is interrupted by the production process into two separate stages. M in one circuit in the circuit is transformed into a new M fric in the next. Surplus value is established as a potential for accumulation. Money is merely the advanced form of capital. Its ultimate purpose is to realize exchange value, not use value. Next is the circuit of productive capital. Its formula is PCMCP. It views production as an integrated process and sees circulation as a mediator for reproduction, thereby connecting preceding and succeeding production cycles. P in the next cycle again becomes P. Therefore, its core is the continuity of the production process, which must not be interrupted. Once production is interrupted, valorization will cease. This is why reserve funds appear at this stage. As for the circuit of commodity capital in this episode of ours, its formula is CMCPC. It begins by taking valorized commodity capital as its starting point. In simple terms, its very starting point already includes surplus value. Regardless of whether it is simple or expanded reproduction, C price always begins the circuit as commodity capital, that is, capital value plus surplus value. Its core lies in its interconnectedness. In simple terms, whether it's simple or expanded reproduction, valorization is always apparent. Furthermore, the C fee of one individual capitalist must correspond to the MC phase of other capitalists. Each circuit begins with a more advanced form of C plan. Perhaps this still feels a bit abstract to you. We can understand it this way. Regardless of whether it's simple reproduction, i.e., consuming the surplus value, or expanded reproduction, i.e., reinvesting the surplus value, C frame after the completion of each circuit always contains newly created surplus value. Even if one capitalist spends all of their surplus value within the total social capital, there will inevitably be other capitalists turning surplus value into new capital, thus driving the upgrading of the form of the total C place. This is inevitable because, for capitalists, to obtain relative surplus value, they will constantly strive to increase productivity, for example, by acquiring more efficient equipment, So when an entire industry adopts a new technology, both the use value form of the commodity, such as quality and function, and the socially necessary labor time required to produce it, i.e., its magnitude of value, will undergo a qualitative change. Due to the interconnectedness of commodity capital, this compels capitalists to use more advanced means of production to complete their production. Because the market is finite, falling behind means your market share will be captured by others and your circuit of capital could gradually break down. Let's delve a little deeper here. Take petroleum, for example. It is both the final product of an oil refinery, C, and the means of production for a chemical plant, C. Its price fluctuations directly affect the stability of the global industrial supply chain. The moment its price goes up, the entire world follows suit with corresponding price hikes. The industries most directly affected would be internal combustion engine vehicles, aviation, machinery, and tourism. This is a form of vertical integration, which is precisely the interconnectedness of commodity capital that we just discussed. And when the various C's of the same type of commodity want to quickly transform into M, besides constantly increasing productivity, they must also continuously consolidate themselves to maintain their competitiveness. When the internal competition reaches a stage where it cannot get any more intense, and when the market no longer has sufficient effective demand, note that I said effective demand, which is different from regular demand, then some capitalists begin to create a host of artificial demands and break down product functions into separate modules. As for simple, straightforward, and durable products, they face three choices. 1. Follow the trend to increase their profit margin. 2. Transform and find a way to survive through decapitalization. But this is beyond the scope of this episode, so we won't delve into it. 3. Uphold the original value and guarantee durability. But the price to pay is that compared to competing products, the profit margin might constantly decline, and the scale of production might also continuously shrink. It also faces an uncertainty. For example, when it tries to raise prices to sustain its circuit, the market might completely reject it and curse it for selling out, must be converted into money, releasing the surplus value. This is the CM process, used for subsequent expanded reproduction or for personal consumption. The formula for this process unfolds as follows. C plus C. Now that we understand these things, now we can string all three circuits together to compare their differences. First of all, the circuits of money capital and productive capital. Both take capital value that is yet to be valorized as their starting point. Meanwhile, the circuit of commodity capital begins with already valorized C plan. The core of the circuit of money capital lies in valorization. Its goal is to go from money to more money. The circuit of productive capital focuses on reproduction with the goal of ensuring the continuity of the production process. As for the circuit of commodity capital, it's like a synthesis of the two. It encompasses both the valorization of surplus value and the reproduction of commodity capital in a continuous flow. Money capital can complete an independent circuit by itself, whereas productive capital and commodity capital must rely on subsequent circuits to continue their circulation and be completed. These three forms each have a different objective, and together they form the complete circuit of capital. At this point, I think you might be wondering, I know all this, so what? What use is it to me? The answer is, let's now look back at the consumption theories from the beginning. I think you'll probably have a much deeper understanding. This so-called idea that commodities can represent a person's status. Is this value system truly sound? Perhaps what you value is a status constructed by people, but what about for capital? What does it value? Is its essence really status, or is it a dream woven for everyone, simply for the sake of the continuity of reproduction? Perhaps you'll argue with me. It's not a dream. It is status. Everyone recognizes it as such, so what can be done? I know it exists for the continuity of circulation, but so what? Using items supposedly representing wealth and poverty to judge the amount of respect a person deserves to receive. What has it led to? The answer is alienation. Because humans are social animals with a herd instinct, each alienated individual desperately, hastily, and unscrupulously tries to prove their position in the eyes of others in order to dominate, control, look down on, and command others. Finding an answer is never the final goal because there is no final destination. You might find these views to be old-fashioned, simple, and outdated. In this fast-paced era, where everyone is clamoring to get rich, they may seem completely out of place, utterly irrational, and you might find me laughable. I won't argue with you. Maybe that's true, and maybe it isn't, because out of all belief systems created by humankind, only money has managed to overcome almost every cultural barrier. It is the most universal and effective system of trust in history. But maybe, late one night, you can lie quietly in bed and ponder. Money, of course, is necessary for our survival. That is indisputable. But when everything becomes oriented around money, when we try to grasp a so-called personal identity within the loop of consumption, display, and reconsumption, what is it all for, in the end? Perhaps what people frantically pursue has never been the commodity itself, but the label on a person certified by an alienated system. When we use that as our measure for the world, we will inevitably lose the ability to understand our very selves within it. The reason I have no power to refute you is because, from one historical period to the next, this has constantly replayed itself, not as a repetition, but with astonishing similarity.